Okay, I think we're ready to continue.
Yes, I don't think that, is this on? It's not on, so can you, are you able to, then I don't need to have it in my face probably.
Okay, now absolutely I can see that.
Okay, well, is everybody back? Good, well, we've come to what I hope is a very enjoyable part of our program. As you know, and as we talked about this morning, earlier this afternoon, the Cicognara Digital Library has always presented a wide range of research opportunities and possibilities for a variety of scholars approaching the collection from different angles. We know that some scholars work on Cicognara, the collection, and other ones work on Cicognara, the scholar, maybe look at his books and his annotations. We know that there's so much subject-based research one might do within the Cicognara library. And we know that people may research the history of the book. Those are just a few examples. And as we've seen, as access to the materials comprising the Cicognara corpus has broadened, so does the potential for what can be done with the collection. We can now imagine, as we all know, some, but we really cannot imagine all of the possibilities for uses of this corpus when it becomes fully digital. So today we'll hear from a few scholars who are representing a sampling of the variety of scholarship possible using Cicognara's library. When we invited them to speak today, I asked them to tell us a little bit about their research and how they have used the Cicognara library either in person or on microfiche in the past, and how they envision using it as a digital resource in the future. I asked them also to address any aspects of the project that they think might be improved or how it might be most useful to them. And I hope that later on with the panel discussion that Sandy will moderate, that we might have some more discussion about that. So I'm going to introduce all of our speakers one by one, and I'm going to apologize for this agenda, which gives you the right names of our scholars, but the titles were just working titles. And so now they've changed their titles to reflect the actual content of their talks. So first we will have Adriano Imanino, who is a lecturer and director of undergraduate programs in the Department of Art History at the University of Buckingham. His main interest is the reception of the classical tradition in the early modern period, with a particular focus on 18th century Britain. In 2013, he organized an exhibition on the Topham collection at Eton College Library, and recently has co-curated with Anne Varrick-Lauder the exhibition Drawn from the Antique, Artists and the Classical Ideal, held at the Sir John Soanes Museum in London and at the Tyler's Museum in Harlem. He is currently working on his book on the patronage and collecting of the first Duke and Duchess of Northumberland in 18th century England, which will be published by Yale University Press and with Nick Penny and Eloisa Dodero on a revised edition of Francis Haskell and Nicholas Penny's Tasting in the Antique. So I will introduce Adriano. The title of his talk is on the board.
Thank you. I will sit here because I need to show a lot of hyperlinks. So I need to go through. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is this working?
No. I don't think it's working.
I don't think it's working. Okay, I will try to raise my voice.
No, just on that.
Can you hear me from the back? Yeah. So, my paper today is very technical, so I apologize in advance, but being an audience of librarians, I hope you will in a way excuse the technicalities of my paper. And I will start with my personal experience in using Cicognara in the last 15 years of my scholarship, and then I will progress with proposal. It's just a proposal, actually. It's something that I've been working on for a long period of time, but it's a proposal for a metadatabase that should and could capitalize on the Cicognara project and on the Getty Research Portal, actually. Initially, I thought about the Getty Research Portal, but of course, I see the Getty Research Portal and the Cicognara project as complementary, of course. So a metadatabase that could present a selection of primary sources for the history of art and the history of architectural theory between the 15th century and the middle of the 19th century. So we're talking about within the time frame of the humanistic theory of art and architecture. And could present this in a user-friendly way and with a scholarly apparatus, with a scholarly presentation to a vast audience of users, from the educated public to undergraduate students to postgraduate students and scholars alike. So it's very much on the line of what we discussed yesterday afternoon, and I will develop on that. So I started using the Cicognara library when I moved to London 15 years ago, and in London, of course, the locus classicus for the use of the Cicognara microfiche was at the Warburg Institute in Bloomsbury. And I think originally the reason why most of the scholars use the Cicognara library is to find copies of primary sources that were not available in a peculiar place, for instance in London. So step by step, all these of course has become obsolete because Heidelberg, the Getty, the Warburg, Gallica, etc., have put the books of the Cicognara library online. So as we know, it's mostly 50% of the Cicognara library is already online. One of the reasons why I think people are still using the microfiche, and this is one of the reasons why actually I use the microfiche long time ago, is to search for annotated copies, what we were discussing yesterday as well at the workshop. I think one of the great richness of the Cicognara library, apart from the library itself and the organization of the Cicognara library, which is like a summa of the artistic literature of the previous 400 years, is really this wealth of annotated copies. I will show you just one example. In this case, these are two editions of the Torrentinian editions of Vasari, one with annotations by Scipione Maffei and the other one with annotation by Padre Resta, so two of the greatest basically scholars and collectors and antiquarians of the 17th and 18th century. Both of them, in this case, they've been recently published, a critical edition by I'm blanking, but it will come to my memory. So Marta Agosti. They've been recently published, both of them actually, in one volume. So in the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working mostly on two related projects. One is a new edition of this book called Taste and the Antique, which was published in 1981 by Francis Haskell and Nicolas Penny, and is a book that actually traces the impact of a selected number, a canonical number of classical statues on the visual arts and on antiquarian publications from the 15th century to the middle of the 19th century. And at the same time, I'm working now on two related projects. One is a book on the essential concepts of the humanistic theory of art, and another one is a book on the impact of antiquarian publications on the visual arts in the 17th and 18th century. So, of course, the Cicognara library and Cicognara's own publication for me are an absolute reference for several reasons. The first reason is because for the humanistic theory of art, Cicognara is one of the last great, if not the last great, theoretician within that tradition. Already Haskell called him basically the last great art historians who could actually have a general overview of Western art history from classical antiquity to the beginning of the 19th century. This is because actually he's really the last incarnation of the humanistic theory of art at its sunset. I mean, before different priorities, different agendas, and different theoretical frameworks will be implemented in, let's say, in the first half of the 19th century. So Cicognara's own opinions on essential concepts like grazia, grace, inventio, ideal beauty and its metaphysical implications is absolutely explicit, like in a way very similar to Joshua Reynolds, with completely opposite views on some of these issues, but it stands out for its clarity, and it's a sort of like sublimation of some of the essential concepts of the humanistic theory of art. So it's very useful for someone who actually wants to trace some of the most recurrent tenets of this tradition. Secondly, the library itself and the categories in which the Cicognara library is divided is really a summa of the humanistic theory of art and architecture, is really a summa of 400 years of scholarship in that sense. And in the way he divides, so the taxonomy of knowledge of the division that Cicognara provides is really reflective of how this, the theory of art and architecture was organized, is really reflective of the theoretical framework of the humanistic theory of art and architecture, and also the pedagogical aspect of that, because of course it reflects very well the way in which the theory of art, the theory of architecture was taught in academies, especially in Italy, of course, but also in France, with the enormous differences between one and the other. So in the last years, at least from, let's say, 2010, I've been assembling a series of files, especially 4 files, one for art treatises, one for architectural treatises, one for antiquarian publications, and one for artist handbooks, so anatomical treatises, proportions, perspective, expressions, etc., etc. These 4 lists, this is just an example that I will touch upon in a second, these 4 files are both, I've assembled them both for my own research, so in a way as research tools for myself, but also in view of this potential metadatabase that selects the 150 most important, 100 to 150 most important treatises for each category. So in total I have files, the primary sources that I list in my 4 files are in the range of 500, 550. And so I will show you first of all how I selected these primaries, the criteria for the selection of the primary sources and the criteria for the selection of their digitized versions online, so my raw material, and then I will show you how potentially this material could be presented in a metadatabase. Bearing in mind that something like this, I think I put it together because I will touch upon this at the end of my presentation, but just a hint now that the study of the humanistic theory of art in Anglophone universities, and especially in the UK, is almost disappeared. There are no modules, almost no modules on that, and I will discuss more at length why later on at the end of my presentation. So this is just my raw material. This is just my file on antiquarian publications, and I just selected a random number of essential sources for the history of the antiquarian studies. I've selected 100, 150 for each one of them based on a set of criteria. First of all, their impact on the antiquarian discourse between the 15th century and 1850. Secondly, their impact on the visual arts. Third, their presence in royal, academic, aristocratic libraries. Fourth, their mention in guidebooks of travelers, of grand tour travelers, etc., etc. So there is a parameter, there are a set of guidelines by which you can select the most recurrent and the most impactful sources for the theory of art, architecture, and antiquarian studies. Secondly, for each one of them, I try to select in the last years the most reliable, this is a typical case, the Heidelberg work, digitized first edition complete text searchable. So when I find a digitized first edition complete text searchable that I'm sure of, that's my reference. So to avoid exactly what we were discussing yesterday at the workshop, the enormous multiplication that you find through a Google search. Through a Google search, you are lost. A scholar is lost. You can imagine a BA student or someone who wants to approach this world from the outside is overwhelming, in my opinion. So I just give you an example of why sometimes I present 2. The 90% of my sources come from the Getty Research Portal or Heidelberg. I found that they are the most, what Francesco used yesterday, reliable, transparent, and
searchability, flexibility, and availability.
good, the Benelli Holy Trinity. So in this case, I present you for a reason. This is the Giovanni Pietro Bellori and Pietro Santibartoli, the Admiranda Romanarum Antiquitatum. It's the book that we saw the first day in the Cicognara collection that I pulled out. In this case, this is an essential publication on reliefs and sarcophagi. Ah, it's not showing there.
I think you have to exit the
You
slide
have to
show.
exit this.
The PowerPoint. I think you have to exit PowerPoint.
But that will make my presentation
I think you can just hit escape to stop the presentation mode.
Like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
There you go.
and then you click.
Now your link is probably already open in Firefox.
Not really. Ah, there you go. Can you see it? Okay, I'll try to, let's see. Okay, in this case, this is the Heidelberg copy, which is, as you can see, quick, reliable, especially for someone like me who scrolls this antiquarian publication and searches for images, for instance, to decode a cycle in a country house in England, right? So I need to see these images very quickly. In this case, it's not text searchable. I'll show you an image. So it's partially text searchable. So the first, in a way, title page is text searchable, but something like this, for instance, which is from one of the Marcus Aurelius relief in the Capitoline Museum, as you can see, of course, is a dirty OCR, inevitably, right? But for instance, for me, it's very important to search how many of the Bartoli prints are from Capitoline, from objects in the Capitoline Museum. So in this case, there is one way one can supplement Heidelberg with something different, which is the Cribeco, is the Corpus Belloriano of the Scuola Normale Superiore di Pisa, where they, and we're talking about this, transcribed the entire publications of Bellori. So if you do a search for the Admiranda and you search for Capitolio, you will be redirected to all the, of course, plates in the Admiranda Romanarum Antiquitatum with engravings from objects in the Capitoline Museum. And for me, it's very useful because I need to consult hundreds of these antiquarian publications in a very quick and efficient way. So this is one of the few occasions in which there is a duplication, if you see what I mean. Otherwise, I try always to stick to the most reliable, text searchable, complete first edition. This is, I apologize, this is completely rudimental and handmade, so this is, I don't have any IT skills, so this, I made it myself with few resources, but these can be very implemented, and I think the interface of the digital Cicognara library is one of the most appealing, transparent, and comprehensible in its minimal approach. Minimalistic approach, I think, is very efficient, so I try to replicate that in a way. Also, in this case, I think you should be able to search for author of date, themes, geography, and I think there should be this initial division. This is the initial division of antiquarianism, art treatises, architectural treatises, and handbooks. And then these can be expanded in the future. But I think at the beginning, one should stick to these four categories. And I will give you just an example. If one clicks on art, this will be redirected to a web page where you have all the art writers in an alphabetical order, right? Before we saw it in chronological order, the antiquarian sources. In this case, I organized them in alphabetical order from the 15th century with Alberti to the early 19th century with William Blake. And you have Italians, you have French, you have Irish, you have Dutch, etc., etc. So the whole range of the artistic literature from the 15th century to the middle of the 19th century. If I'm interested, as I am in this period, on Ludovico Dolce, you will be able to click on Dolce, and I'm touching upon I will touch soon upon the most important part of this metadatabase, something that makes it different from, let's say, the previous ones. If you click on Dolce, you will be redirected to his page where you can have here, click on this catalog entry on Dolce, and his basically a biographical catalog entry with a summary, with an essential bibliography at the end and a list of all his publications. If you click on publication, you have a selection of the most important. These are the four most important. This is just a case study. This can be duplicated for each one of the writers that I showed you before. These are the four most important publications by Dolce for the visual arts. In the Cicognara library, you have many more, but these are the four most important ones for the visual arts. The most important one, of course, is the Aretino of Ludovico Dolce. If you click on the Aretino of Ludovico Dolce, this is the core of the metadatabase. So I think what is really needed is a catalog entry for each one of these 500 primary sources to be selected, if you see what I mean. So the user can actually read about a catalog entry of no more than 2,000 words. So with a word limit to keep it quite efficacious and manageable within a project of a time frame of a project of 3 or 4 years, you have, this is just an extract from the catalog entry on the entry of the Aretino Ludovico Dolce. Then you will have an essential bibliography on the Aretino of Ludovico Dolce, from Paolo Barocchi, inevitably, to Michel Ochman, who wrote the last, 2010, the last authoritative article on Dolce, but also in this case should be quite contained to avoid, in a way, to keep it user-friendly. I think this is one of the most important things. And eventually you will have all the editions. I'm scrolling, imagine that I'm scrolling, of course, on the same web page. Eventually you will have all the editions and translation of Ludovico Dolce Aretino, from the first Italian edition to the early translation to the most recent Spanish edition. So these are all the editions and translations of Ludovico Dolce from 1557 to now. This means that this can also be used by scholars as a reference access to the reception and fortune of a single source. Remember that the Bible of artistic literature, so Julian von Schlosser, Kunstliteratur, la letteratura artistica, is 8 years old, and some of his, I mean, when he lists the successive editions and translations, he is not complete in a way. So this could also be something that actually can be used by scholars as a reference in a way. I just show you 3 that can be selected. Okay. Let me try again. Okay, so in this case, of course, of all this list, right, of, sorry about this system is a bit, right? So of all the editions, of course, you present then a web link, or via IIIF, you can import it, to the most important, of course, is the first edition, the first great French translation that's essential for the access to the original source and its history. And of course, you will explain within the catalog entry why you select these 3. This is the Getty one from the Getty Research Portal, and this can be scrolled, can be seen as mosaic, which is very useful. And you can, in terms of OCR, this is pretty reliable. So for instance, maniera, which is an essential term for Dolce's aesthetic, comes up very easily in this sense. It's a 16th century print, but in this case the OCR is pretty reliable. So I think that this is a very good example of a first edition complete text searchable that should be selected. In this case, I also inserted the Cicognara copy of Ludovico Dolce, and I'll show you why, because it's extremely interesting in this sense. This is the Aretino's copies of Cicognara, and as he says, was in the library of Felibienne, then in the library of Mariette, then in the library of Cerveau d'Agincourt, and then came to the library of Cicognara. So it was originally, it's the book by Dolce, owned by Felibienne, who is one of the founders of the French theory of art, then owned by Mariette, who is one of the great theoreticians and at the center of the Res Publica Literarum of the 18th century, then to Cerveau d'Agincourt, of course, one of the greatest art historians and antiquarians of the early 19th century, and then to Cicognara. And the book has, just to give you an idea, the ex libris of d'Agincourt, then annotations by Mariette from Bottari on Dolce, the ex libris of Felibienne, and then you have in the same volume, let me see if I can find some, you have annotations by Cicognara. So it's, in a way, this is a palimpsest that can be used as a sort of like symbol of the humanistic theory of art, and how these books, these genealogies of books actually trace a continuity between 1557 and 1821 in a way. So I think in this case, the Cicognara copy, the own Cicognara copy is absolutely essential in terms of display in this essential list of digital copies. The third one that I selected, I'm not going to show you, is another Getty copy, and is the first French translation of the Dolce by Aretino by Nicolas Blegueus, who was the director of the French Academy in Rome, and really spread the knowledge of Aretino's Dolce's Aretino all over Europe in the 18th century. So it's one of the other essential copies. Just to show you, there is a website that I think can be used as a template for something like this. And I think there's something, this proposal in a way should really capitalize on the Cicognara in a process of osmosis, to use the Cicognara digital library as the mare magnum and intend this as a sort of like tip of the iceberg that can be presented to a selected public. There are several websites like Art Historicum Europeana and many others that present a series of primary sources online, but none of them had a catalog entry for the specific single source, which I think is absolutely essential. The only one which is very similar and can be used as a template is the Architettura website of the University of Tours, which probably is not the best in terms of graphic design, but is, in terms of content, is, I think, an absolute masterpiece. This was done by the University of Tours, by Frédéric Lemaire and Yves Pauvel, and they gathered together a group of scholars to do exactly what I've been describing so far in terms of art treatises and antiquarian publications, etc., etc. I think that this, of course, should be another of the, let's say, databases that could be used in this sense. I'll just show you, you can search only alphabetically. In this case, these are all architectural treatises published in French or translated in French from the 15th century to the middle of the 17th century. Okay, so it's pretty, the scope is, the chronological scope is limited, but the amount of sources is enormous. Just to go to Vitruvius, for instance, the Cesariano edition that we saw this morning at the American Academy, right? You have here, you click here, and you have a catalog entry of the Cesariano edition, written by Alessandro Rovetta, who is a scholar from the Catholic University, an essential bibliography with Rovetta, of course. So actually each of the catalog entries was commissioned to scholars who had produced critical edition of the primary sources or who had studied the primary sources. And then you click here and you have, in a way, the image mode. In this case is the University of Tours copy. And you can actually, of course, use it and look at it, download it, téléchargement, etc., etc., etc. And I'm about to conclude. I think that something like this, that I see that it's absolutely, I thought about this sort of meta database a few years ago, I think after my PhD when I started teaching in UK universities, because there's a real gap, especially in UK universities, and we're lost in translations. Throughout the United Kingdom, but I think in also many other universities in the world, the humanistic theory of art is not taught anymore. There are not very many modules throughout the United Kingdom, for several reasons. When it's taught, they're still using Anthony Blunt artistic theory in Italy, which was a masterpiece when it was published in 1940. It's 77 years old, this book, right? Which had a new edition in the 60s, but it's a book which is almost 80 years old, and the Bible of artistic literature, Giulio Schlosser Magnino, especially in its 1951 Italian edition with the update of Otto Kurz, has never been translated into English. It's unbelievable, but it's never been translated into English. So actually there are not very many sources for teaching, for instance, a BA or MA level, the humanistic theory of art. Schlosser cannot be used, and a project like this I think could prompt a new updated edition of Schlosser that could be used. But also, since each entry has its own basically, catalog entry. Each digitized source has its own catalog entry, could be used to teach at BA and MA level. Secondly, I think bringing together architectural theory and artistic theory could be a very good platform to make architectural theory and artistry to put the two disciplines in dialogue again, and also to put the study of antiquarianism with the study of history of art in dialogue again. So I think at this as a sort of like arena in which the disciplines could start entering in a dialogue again, especially on the common theoretical principles of the different disciplines. Also, and this is my final slide, I finished, also something like this, so a reasoned, selected database of primary sources could also point at gaps between the Anglophone world and the continental world, I would say. First of all, 80% of articles on the humanistic theory of art or architecture of the last 20 years are either in Italian, in German, or in France. I'm seeing this with the revision of Taste in the Antique. There's a real gap between the Anglophone world and the continental world in that sense, right? On the other hand, many essential sources, primary sources for the study of art history of the last 500 years have never been translated into English, which makes, of course, very difficult to use them in both at undergraduate level and postgraduate level. Just to give you an idea, Cesare Ripa, the Iconology of Cesare Ripa, which is, of course, one of the fundamental texts for the interpretation and study of art history. This is the recent critical edition by Sonia Maffei, published in the Millenni by Einaudi, has never been translated into English. There's an 18th century version of the Iconology of Cesare Ripa, but a more critical edition of the Ripa volume doesn't exist. So you cannot use Ripa from a pedagogical point of view. Or, since yesterday, we were at the Erziana, which of course is Palazzo Zucchero. Just to give you an idea, the Idea of Federico Zucchero, which is one of the central texts for classicism, for 17th century classicism, and for idealism, and for the humanistic theory of art, has never been translated into English. So something like this could point at these gaps and create, in a way, a platform for discussion and point into the directions where extra work can be done and should be done. Thank you.
How does this next set? Are you set the next one up? Oh,
Should we see the next one?
yes, Sylvia Von Jackson.
I don't know.
So, Sylvia, the I'm sorry. Which one is, I'm sorry, yes, that's not. I will introduce Sylvia. Sylvia Vantagiato is attending a second level degree in art history at the Università del Salento. She participated in the 7th International Conference of Art Libraries with the paper on Cicognara's Catalogo Ragionato as a bibliographical tool. Sylvia's research is focused on the relationship between literature and the visual arts. And currently, she is exploring Cicognara's profile as an art critic, collector, and connoisseur.
Thank you. From Florence, Leopoldo Cicognara writes
Louder,
about
please.
There's a microphone.
Does that one work?
Does this little microphone work?
No, it doesn't work.
Nothing works.
Nothing works.
Nothing works.
Can you shout?
From Florence, Leopoldo Cicognara writes to Gaetano Berlignoni. Che io sia pure anche in Firenze me lo confermeranno queste poche righe che le diranno d'era io qui passata pressoché tutta la stagione o infermo convalescente. Il mio stato è di un imbecille che vegeta e non opera più, ma raccoglie gli amari frutti di una ruina grande per le immense spese fatte in pubblicare varie opere di varia lena e di troppo lusso, come l'ultima delle fabbriche veneziane. Ora sto facendo l'ultima pazzia, poiché si stampa il catalogo finalmente e siamo alle 200 pagine impresse, il che corrisponderà ad un sesto del lavoro. Questa lenta e grave noia non me la assorbirò tutta in Firenze, poiché in vero non voglio farmi schiavo d'un catalogo, ma i fogli di stampa mi seguiteranno anche a Roma, dove io muoverà quando e come io non saprei veramente in questo momento ben precisarlo. When Cicognara was going to sell his library, he composed a kind of legacy of artistic and critical ideals. The Catalogo Ragionato dei libri d'arte ed antichità provides an excellent tool for interpretation of Cicognara's library, in particular the proemio and the annotations after the bibliographical descriptions are very useful in order to explain Cicognara tastes and highlight the most interesting peculiarities of Catalogo Ragionato. His library shows the interest of the possessor. It testifies the fortune and the type of welcome that is given to the writer, artist and masterpiece from Cicognara's perspective. He explained that he composed it to please his friend the request, never made the slightest allusion to what had happened to his library. Tornando a questa collezione di libri, il motivo che particolarmente mi indusse a stamparne il catalogo fu quello di soddisfare le istanze di molti amici e conoscitori di questo ramo di studi, e quindi fu manifesto come io son ben lontano dal credere di aver fatto un lavoro completo, qual sarebbe quello di una bibliografia d'autori d'arte ed antichità, con cui si potrebbe allora esaudire la materia, più secondando le cognizioni di quello che le opere da me raccolte. Questo non è che il puro elenco dei libri da me posseduti, tra quali alcuno parrà stranissimo non trovare certe opere ovvie e notissime e di facile acquisto che avrei agevolmente potuto indicare se avessi avuto il piccolo orgoglio di non far apparire alcuna mancanza nella serie degli autori più celebrati. But the editorial success of Catalogo Ragionato surprised the author. A letter addressed to his friends Gino Capponi manifests a certain satisfaction. Mi lusingo infinitamente ciò che scrivete sulle poche righe che precedono il mio catalogo, le quali mossero a tale curiosità, per quel che diversi ne dissero all'orecchio l'uno dell'altro, che ne furono venduti esemplari per la stessa prefazione a cui era estraneo alle nozioni per entro sparse. Non ci resta altra maniera per cacciar fuori i nostri pensieri che velarli sotto coperta o d'un catalogo o d'un breviario soccorre, così si allarmano i revisori. The Catalogo Ragionato was not prepared just for the purpose of selling the collection or for cross-checking the removal of books from Venice to Rome. It is an artistic, literary and documentary proof that allows us to compare this work with the contemporary art catalogues which began to appear at the time in Venice. Cicognara intended to guide the reader or visitor either figuratively or literally so they could appreciate this collection of precious books. His catalogo ragionato, like the contemporary art catalog, addresses the reader in a virtual tour of the library. Cicognara encourages the reader to go beyond the historical information, to recognize the singularity of every book. The opening index raises a certain overview and reveals the layout of the object, which he will describe later, and the comprehensive description of paradox presents to the reader some visual reference. Today, I invite you to switch from the universality of library to the particularity of each book. Leopoldo Cicognara confesses the absence of famous or easily available works, but he looked for the volume which satisfies his curiosity. Ma più specialmente posi in defessa pura nella scelta degli esemplari i molti libri d'antichità figurati, ove la freschezza delle stampe diviene di una somma importanza e non risparmiai diligenze nel cangiare mediocri per ottenere migliori. What is Cicognara's valuation method? He has been searching precious volumes and rare books, and of course he involved all his friends in his researches. Cicognara writes to his friend Francesco Cancellieri, librarian Vatican Library. Dopo finita la distribuzione di quest'ultimo volume, che dovrebbe seguire in febbraio, continua un'altra laboriosissima operetta che stamperò per ricerca universale, il catalogo ragionato della mia libreria d'arte ed antichità. Vedrai una cosa che ti farà paura, mancante forse di cose ovvie, ma però ricchissima di un numero immenso di preziosità. Se sai in Roma qualche cimelio di questo genere, raro per antichità, per stampe in legno, in rame, delle prime e più squisite, indicamelo. Io ho già 3 di questi meraviglia rome rarissimi, di 2 dei quali glieli conto nel secondo volume, mi pare, e ne ho trovato un terzo di Adamo Roth, certamente, dalla forma dei caratteri anteriore, per conseguenza a quello di cui ti ho dato la descrizione, stampato in Treviso del 1475. Così direi del resto di ogni genere, ma avanti di pubblicare questo catalogo bisognerebbe che tu lo vedessi. E come si fa? Very often he points out the wholesome material qualities of his book, and among the most precious volumes are surely Vitruvian codexes. They are not available on microfiche. Please see the glosses for books 692-693. Vitruvio di Architettura Libri Press. Questo codice, che non giunge se non a un terzo di tutto il libro, è stato cominciato col massimo lusso ed eleganza, essendo la prima pagina interamente scritta a lettere d'oro e le 2 seguenti alternate in oro, in lapis lazuli e in porpora. Tutto il resto del codice è in migno e in nero e della medesima bellezza. Non è però anteriore al XV secolo, era della biblioteca del Duca di Cassano. Vitruvi di Architettura Libri Decem, Edizio Princeps. Nel principio la lettera di Giovanni Sulpizio al lettore, segue l'indice con la lettera del cardinale Giovanni Sulpizio. Questa è la più rara e pregiata edizione di quest'opera, per essere la prima non solo, ma perché il suo testo è bastevolmente corretto. Esemplare magnifico in vitello dorato, era della biblioteca Corsini. You may have noticed that he paid a lot of attention to the paratext, pictures, index, quality paper, book binding are carefully examined by Cicognara. The illustration are a source of pleasure and torment for Leopoldo. He confirmed his preference for richly illustrated volumes. A set of illustration is an essential qualification for a book. For example, see the record 584. Delon Philibert. Questo libro contiene 19 libri d'architettura di questo autore e deve riguardarsi come opera completa, giacché le traité de la Charpente forma un trattato separato, sebbene potesse intitolarsi il secondo tomo di quest'opera. Questo architetto è il padre dell'arte in Francia e il migliore scrittore di questa materia, nella quale col progresso dell'età peggiora il gusto, quantunque i modi di esecuzione si perfezionassero. Il libro è buono e le tavole copiosissime in legno sono di bellissima esecuzione, massimamente i capitelli corinzi e le trabeazioni ornate, che sebbene intagliate in legno si direbbero incise in rame. Sono queste frapposte alla bella edizione del testo. L'opera è dedicata a Caterina de' Medici, madre di Carlo IX, magnifico raro esemplare. Very frequently he takes note of the presence of indexes like the number 61. Winkelmann, nel primo volume il saggio sull'allegoria di Winkelmann, scritto per uso degli artisti, che apparve a Dresda per la prima volta nel 1766. Nel secondo sono i 3 dialoghi sull'utilità delle medaglie di Edison, le osservazioni di Gibbon sui medesimi e il discorso sull'allegoria di Sulzer, con alcune osservazioni sugli attributi di Cerere, sulle maniere di figurare l'Eterno Padre e sulle divinità. Tutto corredato di indici copiosissimi. Cicognara's attitude for rare books was very popular between European collectors. In fact, he explains in his annotation in the poem. Ho ciò voluto indicare non già per vantarmi di simili possedimenti, ma poiché così non sarà di sovente citata la rarità dei libri o la squisitezza degli esemplari, come suol farsi nella più parte dei cataloghi, e poiché tal cosa ritiensi per rarissima e preziosa in Francia e in Germania, in Inghilterra, che meno fra noi si presa in Italia e viceversa. Prova ne fanno i prezzi dei bibliografi opposti o quelli che nelle pubbliche vendite si sono anche verificati. Lo stesso dicasi delle legature dei libri, molti dei quali con sopria licenza e non pochi con magnificenza relegati, nella quella arte eccellenti artefici può vantare l'Inghilterra per l'intrinseca perfezione del lavoro che evincia, a parer mio, la ricercata esteriore eleganza dei legatori di Francia e Germania. He often notes the possession of precious book binding, its interest for foreign books. It is testified in a suggestive letter addressed to Pietro Molini, librarian at Libreria Palatina of Florence in 1828, concerning the purchase of a Shakespearean work. Pervenuto pagato di non piccoli crediti che io avevo in Inghilterra con alcuni dei primi librai difficili all'emissione del denaro vivo, ho creduto meglio di prendere libri e oggetti e antiche stampe che ora formano la mia casa e la mia delizia. E fra questi libri uno ve n'ha di troppo lusso e ricchezza, assai male assortito per la mia piccola casa. Ma ho piegato a circostanze più forti di me. Questo ricchissimo libro è il Shakespeare di Bondelli in foglio, legato in marocchino verde e dorato, col magnifico volume atlantico dei 100 quadri tolti dalle tragedie e intagliati da tutti i più famosi intagliatori dell'Inghilterra, compresi i nostri italiani Bartolozzi e Schiavonetti. Queste stampe di un lusso matto si vedono già pendere dalle pareti dei gabinetti del maggior lusso, poiché dopo questa edizione splendidissima furono poi sparse in commercio, ma le prove dell'edizione nominata sono anteriori e di prima freschezza. However, the catalogo ragionato, Cicognara's observations about books are implicit critical questions that he will tackle in his speculative works. We can read together his note added at the book number 442. Borromino Francesco, opera cavata dai suoi originali, aggiunto di una raccolta di vasi formati da illustri artefici antichi. Le opere del Borromino sono concepite con profondità di sapere ed ornate con bizzarrie che annuncia la maggior corruzione del gusto e i deliri dell'immaginazione. Pareva che rivaleggiasse con il suo antagonista Bernini nell'inimicizia con la semplicità, gareggiando nella ricerca del falso. Le taglie sono qui unite in gran parte di quell'architetto e sembrano attestate di evidentemente. His assertion about Lorenzo Bernini and Francesco Borromini can be said the historical method upon which the story della scultura is based. The corruption of taste starts during the 17th century, and in the regard we can say the record 627. Re di Bernardino, vari disegni d'architettura ornati di porte inventati in Roma l'anno 1610. La prima opera è dedicata con lettere incise in rame al cardinal Borghese, composto di 50 porte oltre il frontespizio, lo stemma e la dedica. La seconda è dedicata a Monsignor Pignatelli con 50 depositi oltre il frontespizio, lo stemma e la dedica. Il fusto inclina già alla falsa direzione, benché non sia il principio del Seicento. This declaration is perfectly delineated in two passages from Ragionamenti del Bello, printed in 1808. Portatevi a qualche teatro di musica dove un pirro irato, tiranno di ogni ragion musicale, dominatore di un gusto, falso...
La precedente.
Portatevi a qualche teatro di musica dove un pirro irato, tiranno d'ogni ragion musicale, dominatore di un gusto falso e corrotto, a forza di trilli, orate, gorgheggi e passi, cosiddetti di bravura, impone e diletta, o per meglio dire stordisce e sorprende la moltitudine momentaneamente. Questo stordimento e questa sorpresa, fatalmente ordinari, nascono da una mal distribuita bellezza di esecuzione, da una difficoltà superata ma a proposito, mediante un organo di voce flessibile e che a tutto si presta fuorché al vero carattere della passione. Per cui non il cuore o l'ingegno, ma la sfrenata licenza della laringe impiega ed ostenta tutto il lusso dei passaggi e degli ornamenti, rapida, lenta, vibrata, dolce, ma mai a seconda dell'espressione conveniente. E con quella petulanza propria dei canori elefanti che mandano per gran foce di bocca un fil di voce abborriti dall'immortale Parini. Costoro sono i borromini della musica, che profondono volute, cartocci, ornamenti, fogliami, ad onta dell'agria dorica semplicità. Sono come quel greco pittore che, non sapendo far bella Elena, studiossi di farla almen ricca. And then Cicognara explanation makes the concept clear. Bisogna che gli oggetti rappresentati dall'arte corrispondano non ad attori che sulla scena si atteggiano per comporre un gruppo a forza di artificio, né a modelli infiacchiti dal paziente esercizio di esporre le loro membra, ma rassomiglino a personaggi effettivi, ci facciano dimenticare la funzione e ci trasportino alla realtà della cosa, senza di ciò per mezzo dell'arte non si giunge al sublime. Le semplici attitudini delle statue di Donatello si accostano tanto al sublime quanto se ne allontanano quelle smorfiose del Bernino. In summary, today I will try to demonstrate again that it's not an anachronistic attitude to think about to the efficacy of catalogo ragionato as a bibliographical tool. The digital library surely represents the ideal of sharing that Cicognara wishes in his Osservazioni sulla Bibliomania. The catalogo ragionato shows a perfect structure and a taxonomic system as well as a critical contribution. It is consist by topoi or common places according to the opinion of Alfredo Serrai, and they can be put on a digital map. It's an encyclopedic disposition. Not only are books, but also writers, engravers, collectors, and elements of paratext. In my opinion, these peculiarities attest the modernity and utility of the library and its catalog ragionato. They do not encourage the risk supposed by his osservazioni sulla bibliomania. Instead, today, the Cicognara's books collection represents the wish that Leopoldo had expressed in his poem. In fact, he hopes that nulla dunque a me più caro di questi muti testimoni delle mie affezioni, raccolti nell'epoca che segna la fine della mia giovinezza e dà principio alla maturità. E se le varie annotazioni che per sola mia norma e soccorso della memoria andai segnando sui margini del mio catalogo, ora comparendo alla luce, riusciranno di utilità e pascolo alla curiosità di qualche studioso. Verrà in tal guisa reso anche un omaggio a questi compagni della miglior parte della mia vita. Thanks.
Thank you. Jean-Marie Musto is an art historian who studies intersections between book history and art history. She trained as a bookbinder and conservator and worked in the Harvard University libraries before receiving her PhD from Bryn Mawr College. Research for her doctoral dissertation, supported in part by a grant from the Crest Foundation, explored the development of art historiography in early 19th century Germany. Currently, she's pursuing a degree in library science at the City University of New York while working with the Frick Art Reference Library on the Cicognara project.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Kathleen, for your kind introduction. Thank you also to the Crest Foundation for generous travel support, and to Deborah Kemp and the Frick Art Reference Library for introducing me to Leopoldo Cicognara's library and to the project to digitize his collection. It's an honor to speak with you today. Maybe I should check, am I loud enough? Can people hear? A little louder? Okay. How's it now?
Good.
Okay. All right. Thank you. It's an honor to speak with you today. I look forward to your thoughts about this preliminary investigation of Cicognara's Catalogo Ragionato as a database for digital visualization. And no, that's not it. That's okay. It's the one with the arrow worn off. All right. So, Count Leopoldo Cicognara's library contains thousands of exceptional books and prints, as we have heard. The collection, taken as a whole, provides evidence as to their intellectual context. The annotated catalog that Cicognara published in 1821 provides precious evidence for this context. This evidence is significant not simply for understanding Count Cicognara, but also for the but also for the light it can shed on a moment of rapid transition in the study of art, one that saw the increasing institutionalization, of art history, and one that led towards the Italy that we know today. That is the second. Let's try to figure out how. No, that's not it. How to scroll this. Oh, I got it. Okay, very good. That is the Napoleonic period and its aftermath. All right, so my hope is that digital visualization of the 1821 catalog will help us better understand the collection it represents, along with its creator, its time, and its place. Patterns and trends that go undetected in text format are easily observed when presented in graphic forms such as bar graphs or maps. I would like to discuss the opportunities presented by such data visualizations for introducing Cicognara's collection to a broader audience. Offering visualizations could rapidly clarify the nature and value of Cicognara's collection to a potential user, including myself. The Cicognara catalog is not a transparent database, as we have heard. Its individual entries and collective categories require scrutiny. the modern expectations and to the challenge of understanding its intellectual framework. For example, Cicognara often gave single catalog numbers to more than one distinct work. He thus presented the works as an integrated unit. In other situations, he gave one work 2 or more catalog numbers so that it could appear in more than one section of his consecutively numbered system. Cicognara's collective categories likewise appear more straightforward than they are. That is true even for the first section of his catalogs, Fine Arts in General, as we see here, which sounds straightforward. Cicognara organized his catalog more like a personal archive than like a modern library. As is the case with any idiosyncratic system, its idiosyncrasies provide clues as to its nature and purposes. The catalog's entries can be analyzed one by one. We see, for instance, that Cicognara awarded catalog number 1 to the first major survey of medieval art. This is the posthumously published magnum opus of his deceased friend, Serrou d'Agincourt, who conceived of it as a sequel to Winckelmann's History of Ancient Art. In Cicognara's annotation, he laments the small size and inaccuracy of the illustrations while praising the text's originality and intrinsic merit. Cicognara may have taken the poor illustrations to heart, in part because he considered his own history of sculpture to be a sequel to Serrou d'Agincourt's survey, one that brought the history begun by Winckelmann to the present day. Cicognara's ambitions for his own work may be why he places the main entry for his history of sculpture in this first section and not in the sculpture section, where one might reasonably expect to find it. This section, that is, this Fine Arts in General, does not simply contain works of art in general, it seems, as its title suggests, but key works that define the study of art as Cicognara understands it, including his survey of sculpture, whether their subject is general or not. Reading the catalog as a text offers surprises that can generate potential insights. Data visualizations can confirm or correct these insights while also revealing what is otherwise imperceptible. Here is a bar graph representing all of the categories in Cicognara's catalog. And I realize you can't read all the tiny print there. I'm trying to show you what we would, if we were looking online, we would be able to scroll through it. But for the sake of simplicity and efficiency, I am showing you the full graph as a slide. The fixed linear progression of the categories in this catalog does not appear to be accidental. I'm sure that you have all read through it and maybe thought about this, but if you look carefully, you can see it seems to be a carefully considered progression of 6 overarching themes. This is how I see it. You may see it a little differently, but these are as follows: fine arts, literature, reference works, antiquity, cities and their monuments, and finally, miscellaneous. Everybody gets miscellaneous categories at the end, including small but noteworthy categories such as horsemanship, bibliography, which is really the history of books in some sense, and world religions. I've highlighted 2 of these categories. Literature in yellow, you can see, and in red we have cities and their monuments. Green, despite his own scholarly focus on sculpture, right, as most of you or all of you are aware, sculpture's place in this catalog is not transparent. There is a very small category called sculpture, which you can see with the green arrow at the top right. I guess that'd be for you the top left. So you might think that this is a surprisingly small category of treatises on sculpture among the fine arts categories. The smallest of this category is belied by, if you look through several other categories in his collection, you find more sculpture. These categories are several devoted to ancient art, and those focused on cities and their monuments, and they are pointed out over there. So we might at first wonder, I think this is an interesting question, why the sculpture section is so small. And I don't know if you haven't seen it graphed out like this, whether that has jumped out at you. But after examining the catalog more carefully, with this map in mind, we might think one possibility is that for Cicognara, sculpture served to mediate between the modern and the ancient, and between the fine arts and the built environment, right? So you see it in several categories, perhaps because it was not sculpture's specificity that was so interesting, fascinating about sculpture for Cicognara, but specifically its indeterminacy, that it makes it a productive focus for research. Here we see all categories in Cicognara's catalog, sorted now, instead of in their order, from smallest to largest. And so you can see dispersed literature, you can see dispersed cities and monuments among the other themes in these among these categories. And you will find, if you can read what's written here, which is hard, the very largest category turns out to be on architecture. 566 treatises on architecture. Cicognara's category devoted to ancient and modern Rome, however, the red line just above the bottom blue line, is the 562 works on ancient and modern Rome. So we might not have expected that the two largest categories in Cicognara's collection focus neither on the fine arts nor on sculpture. Instead, they focus on the built environment, and especially the built environment of Rome. So, pushing this investigation a little further, specifically of Cicognara's categories, we might organize them according to the overarching themes. Now, again, you could look at these the categories and come up with maybe some variation on these overarching themes, but I think we would be in the same ballpark. And we would find that in this implicit linear progression of his categories, these themes that come out, you will find that the number of works on cities, that is Rome combined with all other cities, surpasses the number of works on every other theme in Cicognara's collection. So the focus on guidebooks is tremendous in this catalog. And you can see also surprisingly large, this is why I thought for some people, literature, the surprising strength of his concept of literature in art is also very large relative to what one might expect. In short, geographical concerns, however, are central to his intellectual framework. So example 2, we started by discussing Cicognara's first category on the fine arts. We noted that this category includes Winkelmann's, Serrure d'Agincourt's, and Cicognara's surveys. These works are key to the collection because Cicognara understood them, and by extension understood himself, as providing a unified history of art from antiquity to the present. We could use data visualizations to further explore this first foundational category. So we're moving from thinking about the categories overall and the underlying themes that seem to structure it, and to the first category, della bella arte in generale. So looking at this category, we might think about it. Now, I should say at the outset that we don't have, the spreadsheets that we have available, the information we have available. Not everything is easily traceable, but we can easily map, if you especially correct all the, or regularize all the names of place names, all the publication places and their quantities. So we have here a graph of these map of these works. An important consideration is that, of course, the works in translation are often published in locations where people speak the target language, not the language in which they were originally written. So you have to keep in mind, for instance, Cicognara's catalog lists 2 editions of Winkelmann's History of Art and Antiquity, one published in French in Paris, the other in Italian in Rome. He was especially fond of the Italian version, but he had nice things to say about both. He did not, however, own a copy of Winkelmann's work in German or printed in a Germanophone place. The works, so the works in this category span almost 300 years. Looking at those from the 1st century of this run, and so we're organizing this by place of publication first off, and by quantity, you can see the size of the circles reflect the quantity, and by year, if you can see the slider up very up the top right, you'll see that you can organize this by year. Looking at this from the 1st century in this run, we might be surprised to find Oppenheim. It appears here, at least I was surprised, maybe for you, it was like, oh, of course, Oppenheim. It appears here on account of several volumes from a multi-volume work on occult philosophy, written in Latin by the Englishman Robert Flood. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Oppenheim's, with Robert Flood's multi-volume work on occult philosophy. Cicognara explains in his annotation that these particular volumes contain treatises relating to perspective, optics, and painting. Outside Cicognara's catalog, however, Flood does not seem to be known for his thoughts on art. I don't know how many of you have referenced Flood. Is there anybody?
Institute, it was a key book.
What's that? Okay. Flood does not seem to be known for these for works on art. These volumes are unusual choices, at least as I understand it. So Cicognara didn't even own the rest of the volumes on Flood's philosophy. He picked out these, but he did, however, own a number of significant works printed by Flood's printer. So those of you with a particular focus in printing may already be aware, oh, Oppenheim, that must be the Johann Theodor de Brie and his family, a printing house known for its finely illustrated works. So perhaps it was his admiration for the printer, and he was obsessed with fine printing, more than for the author, that brought Flood's work into Cicognara's collection. Data visualizations help us to notice things we didn't expect. In this case, the presence of Oppenheim on our map has led us to consider Cicognara's passion for the art of printing and wonder about to what extent Flood has been of use to people thinking about art. Closer attention to printers represented in Cicognara's catalog might be one way to help us better understand the presence of other unexpected works in his catalog, and as I will discuss in a little bit, maybe also thinking more about comparative private collections from this time and what the overlaps were and were not. Looking at the final century of the category's date range, we find new locations and many more works. Paris didn't appear before, now it dominates, you can see, with 32 works. Venice, with only 1 early work, now appears with 27. A wide range of Italian cities are now represented. Among the few Germanophone areas, Göttingen stands out. This is where Johann Dominic Fiorillo's survey of art history was both written and printed. Fiorillo was the first and only university professor of art history in Cicognara's day. Fiorillo has been credited with introducing the study of art history as an academic discipline. On that account, and on account of his several important students, Fiorillo currently holds a more prominent place, at least in the very Germanic art history that I have been taught, than Count Cicognara. Fiorillo didn't, however, impress Cicognara, who annotates his entry for Fiorillo's survey as follows. Fiorillo did not judge the artworks in Italy with his own eyes. That's a little debatable. And the way in which he focuses on too many works where the arts have little prospered, i.e. Germany and in the north, leaves a notable vacuum in the portion that you have to consider most essential. Cicognara's judgments are not entirely fair. All the same, the mapping of Cicognara's catalog offers a fresh perspective on art historiography of the early 19th century. Example 3. Our bar graph of Cicognara's categories according to quantity indicated that Rome, ancient and modern, was by far the most important geographical category. His collection of guides to cities beyond Rome is, however, just as telling and can be easily mapped by subject, since he provides the subject's labels himself. So we can look here. This is the map of guides to cities beyond Rome by quantity, the size of the circle, and year. And this is the 1st century of that run. The chronological breadth of this category is even greater than the first one we were looking at. It spans 330 years. If we look at the 1st century of this span, from 1489 to 1589, we find that the geographical range is small. Outstanding, literally, is a work on Moscow and Russia in general, way up in the corner there, and all other works pertain to northern Italy, primarily Venice. Looking at the full span of 330 years and 243 works, a range of Western European locations are represented in this collection. Spain, France, the Low Countries stand out. Moscow remains off by itself, the only place east of Vienna. Northern and central Italy are by far the most richly represented. To consider this map in a geopolitical context, we could compare it with a map of the Italian states following the fall of Napoleon, when Cicognara was preparing his catalog. So here we have a bar graph of Cicognara's guides beyond Rome, according to the political geography of Italy in 1816, shortly before Cicognara published his catalog. And I think finally you can properly read that. We see that Cicognara focused most of his attention on the kingdom of Lombardy, Venetia, where he lived. Places beyond Italy, the blue bar here, takes 2nd place. The Papal States, where Cicognara was born and where he would be buried, take 3rd. Cicognara was an Italian patriot, but it is hard to see an overtly political motive in these emphases. It would appear that his geographical interests in Italy focused on those regions with which he had a deep personal connection. However, integrating the large and complex category of works on Rome into his study might better illuminate the geographical focus of Cicognara's collection and allow for a richer analysis. Such an integration would have to take into account, of course, Rome's many permutations as city, as republic, as empire, as capital of the Papal States. I would like to suggest some further possibilities for data visualization of Cicognara's catalog beyond the Roman material. First, to date, we have not tried to prepare subject metadata for these data visualizations. Doing so could greatly enhance our ability to investigate Cicognara's categories, and we're going to give that a shot. Second, data visualizations focusing on Cicognara's off-prints could be informative. I don't know how many others of you have been struck by his off-prints, but he did not generally collect runs of periodicals. And to the extent that metadata is available for the sources of Cicognara's off-prints, his interaction with the journals of his day could be mapped and graphed. This would help us better understand the wider intellectual world in which he worked. Finally, printers. Refining the metadata for printers could similarly enhance our ability to explore his passion for fine printing, which relates, of course, as much to text as to images. And I would like to also suggest one other possible direction, is that of comparing the contents of Cicognara's catalog through data visualizations, which do not require the full Cicognara project to be completed, with private libraries of his contemporaries. For instance, an interesting candidate for comparative data visualization would be Goethe's private library. Goethe's library is not specifically devoted to art, but he was among the major intellectuals writing on art in Cicognara's day, and a cursory investigation suggests that meaningful overlap exists between Goethe's and Cicognara's collections. Data visualizations of Goethe's library are not available currently, but a cooperative project to create such visualizations might be suggested and maybe not that hard to pull off. Doing so could enrich the analytical tools available for interpreting Cicognara's library in relation to an important German collection and offer an Italian perspective on Goethe's library as well. The library of Stanislaw Pataki could also prove fruitful. His print collection survives intact at the University of Warsaw. Although his art and architecture books survive in inventory form only, this is all the more reason to explore the collection virtually. Data visualizations based on Pataki's prints and inventories would take a comparative approach to Cicognara's library in an understudied and therefore especially significant direction. But enough speculation from my end. This work is in progress, and I would love to hear any thoughts or suggestions you may have. I would also like to thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Marie. We're going to move on now to our final speaker, Francesco Bonelli. Francesco is an associate professor at the Department of Arts, Alma Mater Studiorum at the University of Bologna. He previously taught at Columbia University in New York for 15 years. He obtained his PhD in the history of architecture at the Istituto Universitario di Architettura Venezia and his master's of architecture at the School of Architecture La Sapienza in Rome. In 2001, he was the recipient of the postdoctoral Mellon Fellowship at the Department of Art History and Archaeology at Columbia University. He was also a fellow at the Kunsthistorisches Institute in Florence and a fellow associate of the Italian Academy, Columbia University. He is currently directing the Serlio Digital Project in collaboration with the Avery Library at Columbia and the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles, and he is a member of the International Observatory for Cultural Heritage, Italian Academy, Columbia University. He has widely published on various aspects of Renaissance architecture, as well as theory and historiography of post-war architecture, and he has written the book, The Architecture of Giotto's Painting, Cambridge 2012, as well as essays on historiography from 1940 to 1960 through the work of Rudolf Bittauer. His current book project focuses on Antonio da Sangallo the Younger's study of Vitruvius. Francesco?
I'm the last one, so I'll try to be very quick.
Oh,
Don't worry.
no.
So,
It's all right.
and thank you, Catherine, for inviting me to this very exceedingly inspiring conference that put together librarians and historians, which I think is a very important moment of discussion. It made me think about the historians as visitors of a temple and worshiping the goddess, and you librarians like the vestals of so my talk today is it's very quick and is divided in basically in four different sections. The first one is how I came across the Cicognara collection and through my research, and what I did of it, and then I will go back to my current to the Celio Digital project and try to make some sense on how digital humanities can bring a good hope of on the field in terms of art history and even more. So first of all, I'll quickly give you some background on my research, which led me to the Cicognara collection. I'm studying the antiquarian and Vitruvian studies of Antonio da Sangallo the Younger, who's a Florentine architect who put together a high level of erudition in terms of Vitruvian literature, along with empirical practice. He dominated the Roman and basically Central Italian's architecture discourse from Bramante's death up to Antonio's death in 1546. Antonio owned at least 4 editions of Vitruvius, and we know that he actually read more than those 4 editions that he actually owned. And through the analysis of his hand notes on these editions, I was able to, I'm trying to understand, to make sense the way a Renaissance architect is reading, is learning the theory of architecture in the first half of the 16th century, and process it and turn it into real building. The path is not linear. Antonio has some very cultural limits. First of all, his knowledge of Latin, which at the very beginning was not that good, but also the fact that Vitruvius is a source that you cannot understand only through the reading of the text. You need to compare Vitruvius to other literary sources, classical sources that not necessarily were known during the Renaissance, as well as with actual ruins, Roman ruins. The problem is that those Roman ruins available to Renaissance architects were, first of all, were heavily corrupted by all the medieval construction and deterioration that happened to the original structure, but also because Vitruvius is mostly talking about Roman Republican architecture, whereas the ruins available in the Renaissance were mostly imperial ruins, which are quite different. So this is the premise. But the 4 books, the 4 Vitruvius owned by Antonio are scattered and spread throughout Europe and America. And the Fra Giocondo's 1511 edition is at the Strahov Library in Prague. The Fra Giocondo's 1513 edition is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art of New York. And he also owned 2 Durantino's 1524 editions, one at the Vatican Library and one at the Biblioteca Palatina in Parma. If these editions were all digitized, my job would have been much easier, of course, and I would avoid many travel across Europe and America. But anyway, so reading this annotation, and now I can start to show you some slides. Yeah, in 2012, at the beginning of my research on Antonio da Sangallo the Younger's Vitruvian studies, I was searching for a very particular Vitruvius de Architectura, not knowing whether it was a printed edition or a manuscript. My only confidence was that it must have been located at the Vatican Library. And the clue was given by Antonio himself, who, on the margin of the page of one of his annotated Vitruvius, in this case is the Prague edition, Fra Giocondo edition. There's a pointer here?
Yes. It's supposed to be in the end.
It doesn't matter, I used it. So he writes here, as you can see, on page 39, talking in chapter, I think I can handle it. Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So on page 39 verso of his 1511 Prague edition, which is a section of the book where Vitruvius explains how to dimension and shape the gate of the temple. Antonio annotates here. Oh, sorry. Here. quello di libreria del Papa dice antepagmenti, meaning that quello means that book in the Pope's library says antepagmenti. Antepagmenti is basically the door frame. Citing therefore an edition kept at the Vatican Library because of the Libreria del Papa. And we know that Antonio da Sangallo might have been the legitimate son of, or actually the legitimate brother of Pope Leo X. But we are not sure. The meaning that he had full access to the Vatican Library. So, so I had this clue, how to find a Vitruvius manuscript or at the Vatican Library. Well, you go there, you look through the index, and you find it. But I started. I was very lazy, and I didn't have time, and I started to go through the still very useful article written in 1967 by Karol Krinsky, 78 Vitruvius manuscript that is being published on the Journal of the Wargo and Courtauld Institute, which mentions 22 Vitruvius called the VAV. And of course, any of these could have been in the Cicognara's collection, been acquired by the Vatican Library in 1824, because, you know, in the 1530s, probably, of the 16th century, we know that this Vitruvius cited by Antonio was already in the Vatican Library. However, my attention was drawn by two manuscripts quoted by Krinsky, Cicognara 691 and 692, already quoted by Silvia Pantagiato. Cicognara 691 is a 14th century manuscript containing some diagrams, whereas Cicognara 692, described by Krinsky as not before 15th century, origin ex collection of Duke of Cassano, is a manuscript that includes only the first three books. At this point, I filled out and submitted the form, drawing from the aforementioned call numbers found in Krinsky's articles, only after I verified it in the Cicognara Index, the one available open shelf in the main reading room of the Vatican Library. When I stepped at the circulation desk to retrieve my request, I was told that the call number was wrong and no item corresponds to my query. So I picked up the Cicognara Index on the shelf and showed it to the librarian, who told me that the one on display is not accurate and that the good one is under his desk, available only upon request. Together, we went through the new index and we found out that the actual call numbers of the two Cicognaras Vitruvius are Vaticano Latino 8488, parenthesis ex Cicognara 691, and Vaticano Latino 8489, parenthesis Cicognara 692. Only at this point, I was able to access to the two manuscripts, which were not really useful for my research, even though they both deserve an ad hoc study, especially for the interesting handnotes written with red ink on the margin of Cicognara 691. So from this micro story, we firstly learned that the Cicognara Index on display at the Vatican Library is obsolete after the migration of a number of manuscripts to the Vaticano Latino Fund. And I know that this issue has been already discussed 2 days ago at the Vatican Library, but I was not there, so I don't know the answer, but you probably know, but I don't. So this migration happened evidently somehow after 1967, because I trust Karol Krinsky to have actually requested those two books and been able to find them through those call numbers. Otherwise, the migration happened sometime before. And I'm confident that the Vatican librarians are aware of the discrepancy between the two indexes. If it's not the case, I'm very happy to offer this information to be put on the record. It also tells us that, very likely, at least these manuscripts have either never been requested after 1967, or conversely, no action has been taken to update the index available to the readers. I hope that a full check of this index will also be part of the digital project, the Cicognara project, and the correct index, the one currently available only to the librarians, will be posted on the Cicognara website. But the story goes beyond the mere flow of the Cicognara's amended index. I'm probably inventing the, as we say in Italy, the warm water, but this story tells us that the active and constant collaboration between the historian and the librarian that not necessarily pursues the same goal benefits both the research as well as the conservation and the availability of the sources. This is particularly true when the subjects are annotated books, my field of expertise. Um, um, even though limited to Renaissance architectural treatises. For example, I'm currently directing a research project on Sebastiano Serlio, sponsored by Avery Library and the Italian Academy at Columbia University, an important Italian Renaissance architect and theoretician who lived and worked between Italy and France. He wrote some crucial publications that affected the language of architecture throughout Europe, and yeah, here I'm showing you here one of the most famous book by Serlio. So among this publication, I want to mention the very first book entirely written on architectural order, the Regole Generali di Architettura sopra le 5 maniere degli edifici, published in Venice in 1537, the first edition. And the very first book where ancient Roman monuments has been illustrated, the Terzo Libro di Sebastiano Serlio Bolognese, published in Venice in 1540. This book has been published in many languages, in many European countries and beyond, spreading the classical architecture among many European courts. So it's really a European project working on Sebastiano Serlio because it really is a series of publications that has been extremely successful throughout Europe and beyond. Because, for example, a large number of monasteries and churches built by the Spanish colonials, both in Mexico but also in Brazil, feature the church facades of these monasteries following. Has been considered following very strictly the Serlio rules in terms of church architecture. So it's really a topic that has a very broad geographical consequence. Several of these two books are annotated, revealing the way readers, which can be either architects, lords, erudites, humanists, interpreted the text across Europe, meaning how the universal prototype of Roman architecture has been interpreted in countries where this exemplar, these Roman ruins didn't exist. So it was the only printed book, the first printed book that shows to a very large European audience the Roman ruins. And it's interesting the way this Roman ruins has been interpreted and appreciated or not appreciated by readers from throughout Europe. The task of our project is the digitalization of the manuscript on domestic architecture, which was meant to be the 6th volume included in a series of 7 written by the Bolognese architect Sebastiano Serlio between Italy and France, starting from the 1530s of the 16th century up to the end of his life. And now I want to briefly show you some meaningful images. The content of the book is the graphic description of private houses sorted out according to the owner's social status. This is also another very important issue. The first book that shows private dwellings starting from the lowest social class all the way up to the king. Starting from the house of the poor farmer, which I'm showing you here. Actually, this is the no, it is in the next. Yeah, here. So this is one of the basic level of dwelling considered by Serlio. So units that are organized within a regular, more or less rectangular space divided into very simple rooms, which function as bedrooms and a living room and a portico that can be used as with multi-function purpose, the constant presence of the big fireplace that is really the heart, the core of the house. And see, we can see how whenever the social status of the owner increases, also both the plan and the elevation, they accordingly get bigger and more sophisticated. And even more, which I find even more interesting is these are the houses of the poor people within the cities. And this is interesting because you can see how Sergio is already conceiving the sort of units that can be repeated as a module, which is something, as you know, is a kind of typology extremely successful up to our time, and is a kind of typology that shapes the peripheries of most of the European cities. So, so this manuscript carries many different reasons to be studied yeah, to be published and studied. So the yeah, but also I want to show you briefly the contents of this book. So there are approximately 160 drawings that shows the plans, elevation, and section of these houses. But also we have a very detailed description of this architecture, described room by room, the function of each room, the shape. Sometimes Sergio describes also possible furnishing possibilities. So the handwriting is rather clear. We trying to it has been transcribed already, but many years ago and here we have, I think, Claude de Monet, who helped us in Avery Library of the transcription of the old text, which will be posted in the website. But also we can see, very detailed elevation of the buildings. This is in particular represents the facade of a noble man in the city, up to the sheets of large size, like this one here, that represent the plan of the royal palace. So again, it encompasses the whole social spectrum of the society, basically of the two societies that Sergio knew better, the Italian one and the French one. Sergio moved to Paris at a certain point of his life, appointed by Francois Premier as the chief architect, architect royal, even though he was never been able to build anything. But he ended also his life in France. So. The manuscript, owned by Avery Library, Columbia University, is an advanced draft of a presentation copy on vellum, today owned by the Bayerische Stadtbibliothek in Munich, the Codex Iconographic 189, from which 62 proof of unfinished woodblocks were produced, today in the National Bibliothek in Vienna. So, meaning that the Avery manuscript is the first draft, whereas in Munich we have the more advanced draft, and then in Vienna we have some proof of prints. So it's also very important because at least in the field of architectural theory and book production, is the only case in the Renaissance that we can sort out at least the last stages of the book, of the making of the book. So, the Sergio project is not only interesting for architectural and art historians or historian of sociology, but also for historian of books. Sergio's book project, however, was stopped at this stage, and the book has never been published. The outcome of Serio's digital project is a website open to everybody, accessible through Columbia University Library's website, and will show not only the manuscript scan at a very high resolution, but it will be also compared with the Munich and the Vienna materials, in order to show the process of a bookmaking in the Renaissance. A series of essays written by Serio specialists and a glossary will complement the website. Working on this project, I had the opportunity to access Serio's books in several libraries, including the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, Avery Library, of course, and the Kunsthistorisches Institute of Florence, where actually there is a very important edition of Serio's, because it has the only case that is known today is as ex libris by Palladio, and is the only book that we know that belonged to Palladio, and actually we can be quite safe in stating that that ex libris is not a typical 18th or 19th century forgery, but it can be is real, because the ex libris in the ex libris is called is written Palladio with one L only, meaning that if it was somebody that want to sell the book on to Palladio would never misspell the name Palladio. So probably was a book that Palladio kept in his office, available to his to the workshop and not to himself. But again, the only ex libris, only book that has been owned by Palladio that is today is known. Then I visited the British Library and the Getty Library and many others. I was able to go through many annotated books and wherever possible to take pictures of the handnotes and try to compare them and discuss with other members of the project. To this respect, particularly important is the Avery Library Serious material in terms of quantity and quality, because Avery Library not only holds the Avery manuscript, but it also has 31 volumes that they're all in the process to be digitalized and included in the website. And even the Cicognara collection contains 14 serious books in Italian, French, Spanish, and German as well. Some first edition and reprints showing the Veneto's counts great admiration for the Bolognese architects. And yet, and I was thinking why Cicognara owns serious edition written in French, Spanish, and German. And maybe Dottoressa Vantaggiato answered this question because he had credits with booksellers throughout Europe, correct? And so probably that is could be one of the explanations. Also the Getty Library Senior Collection, formerly owned by the Italian famous architect Giovanni Muzio from Milan, contains a dozen of books. Among these, a very interesting one that I'm showing you a couple of images with some very interesting handnotes written, as you can see, in this very small but very refined handwriting, very well organized, very clear, which and also the contents of the handwriting is very interesting because the writer here, that we can see through this fragment, is commenting this caption related to the dimension of the Pantheon. See, this is this part here. You can see the Pantheon plan, and it's funny because he's translating in Latin a caption that is written in Italian. With some very quoting Philandrier, for example. So the writer is erudite. He knows about architecture because he read Philandrier. Philandrier is edition of Vitruvius and commentaries is written in Latin. Is extremely hard reading, but the handwriting is very specific, is very peculiar, that I suspect, but I need further studies and analysis, that could be a very young Vincenzo Scamozzi. And if this could be proved, this would be quite important, because Scamozzi owned probably one of the most important private library on architecture in the 16th century. This library now is dispersed. We only know half a dozen of books that he owned through his ex-live. This one is actually at Columbia University. But anyway, if this could be proved, this could be another addition to this library, to the knowledge of Scamozzi's library. The third book of antiquity with some handnotes which require special attention, being the handwriting suspiciously close to Vincenzo. I'm sorry, I'm rereading. The great Veneto architect and theoretician who himself owned, as far as we know, at least a couple of serious books. One of these included, and here we are again, in the Cicognara collection. So what I'm trying to say is that the digitalization of the Cicognara library can be useful in many respects. In my case, it would be useful for the annotated books. Let's not forget that many of the Cicognara holdings, as has been already said several times this afternoon, are books which digitalized version is already available elsewhere. And I hope that part of the project will take into consideration this aspect, that turns a volume, I mean a serial object, into a unique item. And that the website could be somehow connected with other similar digital projects. Because, for example, if we only put together the serious books of the Cicognara collection with the one of the Gettys and the Columbia University, the Kunst, altogether we already a number that is over 100 items, which is really, really consistent and would be extremely important for serious studies. And I just explain you what the importance of studying serial in many different disciplines. My team of scholars involved in the Serio Digital project is spread out between the US and Europe, a distribution that requires frequent travels and Skype conversation in the middle of the night, something that I'm sure the team of the Cicognara Digital project knows very well. So in order to cope with this issue and to keep the discussion active, alive, and available to everybody, we, at the beginning, we used the so-called Getty Scholar Workspace, Getty's online environment for the collaborative research projects, which is an open source software package drawing from Drupal and other digital sources, but adjusted to the needs of art and architectural historians. Unfortunately, the GSW didn't really work for our purpose because it has some limits when dealing with very high resolution images, because the images appears with some gray tiles right in the middle, and so it makes the image unworkable. So, but we found a different afterlife for the GSW. Because recently the GSW has started to be used as the official digital cloud, the cloud for the students of my department in Bologna who are using this, the GSW as the environment where they can craft their thesis or dissertation. And this is very useful for a student because in Italy, as you know, many students come from all over the place, from Sicily to Sardinia, from Piedmont, Puglia, wherever. And every time they have to talk with their advisor, they have to come over to Bologna, make an appointment. Whereas the GSW, that is a cloud that allows people, a number of people, to access the same materials and interact with this material and add comments, and there is also a very useful tool for chatting. So allows the advisor to be in charge and to get to know the progress of the work of the students in real time. So this is a very useful tool that is being extremely successful within the students. The students are very happy to use that. Less so by my colleagues who don't want to learn new digital stuff. But so anyway, so using this resource, even in the something that could be useful, I think, also in this in the Cicognara project, because keep put together people coming from all over the place, allows people to interact at the same time with the same material. Again, conclusion, I think that this meeting yesterday and today has been extremely important because shows the total lack of communication between scholars and librarians, and which is a flaw, is a huge problem that ultimately affects the research. So thank you very much. Sorry, I have other footnotes, handnotes written.
So we've been kindly advised that we are able to go just a little bit until towards 7 o'clock, so that we do have a moment to ask a few questions of our speakers, or to have them ask each other's questions before we repair to our Prosecco and celebration. Do we have any questions then for any of our speakers or comments? Yes.
I would have a question for Adriana. First of all, thank you very much for your critical approach. I love that you criticize what the problems are. It's very, very helpful and inspiring. And one of my questions to you, to the work you're doing, was who pays you? Because this is not a typical position to have, to look for the data, to try to combine it. Is there a financing issue for this approach that you're having? Is it a hobby that you're doing? Are there enough physicians who do what you do to look how the data could be combined, how it's used, what is needed by the scholars? That was a good one.
No, you're right. No one pays me. That's for sure. But I've been assembling this for my own research, because without, you see what I mean, exactly what Francesco was saying, I need the fastest and most reliable source to look for images, as simple as that, or to look for concepts within the humanistic theory of art. These are my two priorities. So I've been assembling this in the last years for myself and for the students, and so I share this with the students. In the future, I'm planning in 2018 to apply for the European Research Council. Of course, this is not the core, this is the digital part of the project. Then, of course, it will have some research outputs, which will be the core of the, and if it's not the European Research Council, I will apply to a series of funds to create, you see, exactly like a work platform around this with PhD students, postdoctoral students, and people who can actually, and pay people who can write the entries, if you see what I mean. I mean, that's the critical thing. And I think that should come together with the digital Cicognara project, if you see what I mean, if that one could build on top of that. But assemble this list of, you see what I mean, of primary sources, if you study this kind of subject, comes natural after a while, because over and over you will be using the same source, and you will realize that, for instance, the Geli, the Heidelberg, or Gallica, often, especially for French material, are the most reliable ones. Certainly Heidelberg and Geli are the most approachable and quick to use, and so you select that, if you see what I mean. And for the architectural treatises, Tour has already done an enormous work that could be incorporated. So, see what I mean? You build something that is light, in a way, and capitalizes on someone else's work.
Something I think for the project that I really took away from what you said, that the fast and responsive interface is really, really critical.
It's crucial. Yeah.
But also the ability which IIIF can give us, if we provide the links, and also those links to the manifest, which would easily allow scholars like yourself to reuse, incorporate into other projects the additions that are there.
Yeah, not only of course, so far I've been showing the Geli, Heidelberg, but that could, when they're incorporating within the Cicognara project, that could.
Right.
Well, but with IIIF, this is not.
So you don't have to even link out to it, but you can incorporate it in a new
environment
just by having the manifest.
Exactly, of course.
So I think that
goes beyond this problem.
It's very. I mean, we really have to concentrate on making sure that's a possibility. Other questions or comments? I thought this was such an interesting constellation of approaches in using the material.
Well, I would just like to follow up on Francesco's comment about librarians and scholars, because I think we thought that it was just so important to include scholars in this discussion early. Many of us have built projects in the past, and we did not talk to scholars soon enough. But I think in terms of your question, this is the digital humanities, and this is exactly it. What is the scholar's role? What is the librarian's role, and others? I think this is a great discussion, and it doesn't happen soon enough in projects, often enough. And I think that it's true for this project, and I'm glad we did this, but I think in general it's a lesson for all of us to remember. And I thank you for saying that and for being here.
Thank you.
For those of you who've worked really a lot with the Cicognara corpus, what did you make of Jean-Marie's mappings and the categorizations and the quantifications of things and seeing it? Was that exactly what you expected? Were you surprised by anything?
I think it's very useful, can be a very useful tool, as long as it's neutral, if you see what I mean. As long as it offers, in a way, data to then scholars to interpret,
Yeah.
I think. For instance, I'll give you a perfect example. The sculpture section is short because traditionally specific sources on sculpture are very limited. So you have Alberti, Gauricus, Bosellis, you can count them.
But at the same time, there are sculptures discussed in other areas.
Yeah, clearly, but that's why your research is, it's useful in that sense, if you see what I mean. Because if we take the if in the future the Cicognara library becomes really the mare magnum, so let's put it this way, with the, at least in the first phase of the project, so it becomes the reference, right? Yours, it's a way to navigate it in a successful way, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you were seeing were screenshots rather than what you can manipulate, but they're designed to be manipulated. So you can find out more from the tooltip as you move your mouse around and what exactly is where.
So you can insert criteria as well, I suppose, through which you can search.
You can move into it, yeah.
Right.
Well, it's great to learn that a striking feature underlines a true point.
Right.
The other thing is fascinating, flood. It's one of the most famous magical and esoterical treatises of the 16th century.
Yeah, but for art and theory,
exactly.
Yeah,
so you would find it in the 16th century probably in libraries of architects and maybe artists, certainly Armenini and Lomasso, but it's very, very fascinating that at the beginning of the 19th century, Cicognara still collects flood in his library. And also the second one is Cornelius Agrippa, the Varitates Scientiarum, and he has also the Occulta Philosophia. So at the beginning of the 19th, that shows the depth of knowledge of the previous tradition of Cicognara, if you know what I mean. So it's something that at the beginning of the 19th century, certainly you would not expect to find in a library of an art historian or a critic or a collector in that sense.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's valuable in that sense.
I think it's also worth noting that one of the goals of our project is to release data sets of the corpus for people to analyze in various ways. So I think it could open up similar kinds of interpretations on a broader scale and be used for lots of different inquiries.
Is it just a matter of adding a few more subject areas and cleaning up the data that we have? Because there's this enormous, the spreadsheet for the basic project, as you've seen images of it, is tremendous. It's a tremendous accomplishment in itself.
Well, the data that's been assembled there is coming from, the Catalogo, the MARC records, but there's certainly the ability there then to augment the project with other kinds of data.
And clean up the data.
Or
the more
regularized data.
the more that goes in, the better it's going to be.
The more, yes, exactly, and to allow for that.
And also to apply to other libraries. I'd love to see it done on the East Lake Library.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Any other questions or commentaries? Yes, Charlotte.
I thought that Jean-Marie's data visualization was very inspiring and made me think directly of is this specific to art historical treatises, these publication places? And then I would love to compare this to other book productions of the
It
time.
calls out to compare, and then you really begin to think of it as a collection.
Yeah,
In a
most
way
of the
that's
work.
hardly.
Yeah, your theology library would be completely different. Maybe.
And there was just the interesting point for me, and then to go on to have this knowledge provided at a later stage, you would have to be aware of the work that Jean-Marie is doing, and also obviously the work that Sylvia has already done of comparing all these different parts of the work and also the other. It would be really interesting and inspiring to have maybe a small overview of the work that's already been done in that area, and to have it attached to some way of the digital library to show what work is already there, because somebody who would see Jean-Marie's work would maybe be inspired to do this for another area of production. And I was quite amazed what has already been done, and would love to follow up with all of those. So I think it would be lovely to have in some capacity the projects that are already done with the data attached to the project on the online sources.
I know this is something that Alexandra has some thoughts on.
No, very much so. I think that, I mean, our project makes very little sense without researchers using the material. So I think that is very much one of our aims actually of this project, not only to have a network and a collaboration amongst these art libraries that are present, but also to actually get input from scholars and actually also to create a bit of a network. One thing we've been talking about is just simply having, starting off with just a website where we could actually refer to all of your work, where we could sort of bring it all together and have some information, and where you can add other scholars as well, linking to your websites, linking to your project, actually bringing them into connection. But I think also something that you have been saying, you can of course also take it a step further and see how your projects progress and whether it makes sense to link some information or at certain, I think at book level or item level to link out to other projects. I think that's certainly something we need to follow up as well. And then actually also in the course of this project, and I think that is a key also to you now, is if you find something in our project that isn't working or that you require or that you would like, I think very much let us know, because I think there are people in this room and from the art libraries who very much want to make this work and actually very much want to provide scholars with the possibilities to work with the material. And so the feedback is very, very helpful.
I think another thing that came out, which was very important from these 2 days, and that is within the corpus, the manuscript material, the individual manuscripts, but also the annotations, which are a kind of manuscript material added onto the printed books, and all of the repercussions of that. And I think, again, that's something that we need to be very attentive to, because it's not just a list of books. It is Cicognara's own library and what that actually means. So I think that that's an aspect that we really need to find a way to valorize as well, and to open up and make accessible.
Particularly for a selection of which book gets digitized, it can foreground all the annotated ones.
Maybe another thing that actually came out from Francesco's paper that we didn't discuss yesterday, whenever it's known, it would be very useful to have the new call number.
Right, it's crazy.
So absolutely crucial, especially if they've been, ex-Cicognara. If you find the also using the annotated catalog that it's at the Vatican, actually, that would be very, very useful.
But I think we can say at this point, I think this is very much, we were discussing about that, and it's something we would like to do. We're working on that, and we want to do something together. The annual library, I mean, we worked on that for a while, but actually it's very difficult for us to go back to this project. So this is the occasion through which we can go back to that. First of all, examining the catalog, the Catálogo Regional together with books. And we want to add the annotations
and every senior in the books. We are not doing that with other collections because the policy of the library at the moment, because of the lack of staff, and you can imagine all these sort of things going on in the libraries. In libraries, we are not doing more than that, but this could be a good occasion to start with. So it's
for someone else in the project to come do that work, or opportunity for the Vatican? Yeah.
well, we would like to promote that.
Yeah.
And with the help, with some help.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that we could discover more, new things, and for the benefit of everyone, and especially for the scholars, not just for us librarians, because we are not doing that for ourselves. So I'm sorry to say that, we are not neglecting things. We are trying to do our best.
Yeah. To realize.
With adding such an amount of large collections, not just books, with very, few people in the staff, considering the amount of collections we have. We are the library of libraries and beyond. Yes.
But I think what's wonderful about a gathering like this, and that there is something that we've identified as we think is important and important to the larger field, and that you can entertain, that we can entertain working together. Because you do, as you say, you have many priorities and many collections, that the Vatican that we could figure out a way to work together. That question is how we can do
in order
that.
to save time.
It's very exciting.
Sparing time of giving as much information as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have to find a way, which could be for ourselves a model to be followed for other elections.
Yes.
And I do very much appreciate what scholars say about things, because it's essential, it's crucial to know what are their needs in order to provide the information they need. And as Diana said, they want them rapidly, and so we are not as quick as we should be, unfortunately. But that's the point. What can we do to help you in doing your work with the small energy? We have energy, but we have not many resources in order to do that. But be sure that we will do our best. Be sure. And I was very much interested in the example that Adriano offered to us with the different passages of a book. And if you simply give information about the edition, it could be interesting, but not so interesting. The interest of the thing is in those passages. So in the history of the object in itself, the importance of the annotations you can find there. So that's the point. Scholars are interested. I kept on saying this these days. They are interested in the exemplars. The uniqueness of each document. So we have to show the many uniquenesses we have in our libraries. We don't have to offer copies or copies and copies and copies of the same thing, but we have to offer the differences so that they can compare and they can choose and they can check and they can ask us and they can suggest. As Professor Benelli said, we can offer descriptions because they are the experts. So we can save time in giving some information that they can process and let us have the feedback. So I think this is a very good starting point. I'm so, energetic at the moment that I couldn't imagine the library starting right now.
Yeah. We're going to have to close. We're going to have to close here, but I did just want to take a moment to say, one of the things that we hoped was for all the partners to come together and be reinvigorated about this project. We are already very excited about it, but I know I speak for everyone that we have just been really more inspired about the work that we're doing together and excited about the possibilities. I want to say thank you again to our hosts from the Vatican on the first day when we had this incredible privilege to go and see the Fondo in situ. To coming here today and hearing from 4 scholars who have looked at and used this material and also inspire us to work together and build things in new ways. I also want to give a very special thank you to Sebastian Pirel and to Francisca, yes, no, who have done incredible work to make us welcome here and to arrange all of these things, and also to Golo at the Herziano. It's just been an incredible 3 days, which we will not forget, and we are beholden.